this computer. Okay, so welcome everybody to this session on flipping the table. Not in rage, hopefully, but in creativity. We're going to have 5 instructors who have taught in the flipped format at least once, some twice, some for multiple courses within the last couple of years. And we have lots of interesting insights to share, including highs, lows, pitfalls, and various things to help you decide whether this format might be right for you and for your course context. Rather than go through and introduce each person separately on this slide, what we're going to do is go to here and tell you a bit about each person's course and our custom blend, so how we've chosen to flip our course. We have some questions for the panelists about various aspects of flipped learning, and then we will have some time for questions from the audience. If you have a question along the way, if something that we say sparks a question in your mind, feel free to type it into the chat as you think of it. Don't worry about holding on to it until the end. And then we'll gather them all up and answer them all at the end. So you're welcome to type anytime, and we will address them as we come to them. There's a message in the chat. Oh yes, if you would like to enable closed captioning or view a live transcript, click on the live transcript button. And I don't know what the AI companion button does, but I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. So we'll see. I have not clicked the button before, so I don't know what it does. But yeah, we'll take it from there. So let's go around and we will introduce ourselves and our courses at the same time, if that's all right. And I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. We're going to tell you about our classes and a super quick description of how we flipped them. So we'll start with me. I'm Diana Skrzydlo in the Department of Statistics and Actuarial Science, and I flipped Stat 334, which is a third-year statistics course for business and accounting students. It has about 60 students in it, thereabouts, and it is a required course for all of those students. And reason I pursued flipping was because I'd come out of the pandemic where I had to create a bunch of digital assets and I wanted to reuse them, but also get back the benefits of in-person contact. So how my custom blend worked was I had fewer than the usual 3 contact hours for the course. I actually only met once a week for an hour and a half. I posted videos, 2 videos a week, and then in that 1.5 hour in class, we would meet and we would do a Kahoot quiz on the material, as well as a in-person group activity, and they would hand that in by the end of the class. There were some other assessments as well, but that was the basic model of my flipping. I will pass it on to Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks, Diana. You guys can hear me okay, right? Yeah, okay. So I have 2 courses that I flipped. I'm a lecturer in chemical engineering. I guess I should have said that first. But the first one that I flipped was kind of the same reasons as Diana. I set up Mobius content during the pandemic and did a lot of problem solving synchronously with the students. So I wanted to kind of mimic that in a classroom setting. So I kept my Mobius content edited, improved as we went along, and then just did problem solving in the classroom. And I guess we'll talk a little bit more about the 2 courses and the differences and the challenges a little bit later. And then the other course, so that one it's a required course, first year, a 1B course, and usually between 60 and 80 students, depending on how big our incoming class of students is. And then I also flipped a 4A course, CHE 480, again, required course. The reasons for this one were a little bit different. We changed the way our curriculum worked a little bit, and I went from having that 60 students to having about 120. And based on the content in this course, it was a lot to do in a classroom, all in the classroom with all the students. And I wanted to have an opportunity to split them in groups and then without kind of burning out the instructor. So just to kind of do the most important things together. And then there was another side motivation is that by this time with our co-op system, students had different experiences. So some students knew a lot of the content in the course or different sections of the course more than others. So it gave them some more flexibility to manage their learning on their own and do, problem solving activities and stuff in class. So I guess Scott's next, hey?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'm a lecturer in the Center for Society, Technology, and Values. That's STV. And what we do is teach critical thinking about technology to all students, but 70 to 80% of our students are engineering or STEM based. So I had two courses that I flipped. STV 100 is a large class of about 80 students. And what I found during the pandemic was I had been forced to cut way back on stuff. I did the numbers. I've actually taught this course over 50 times now because I was teaching it every term for a long time. And you build up a lot of stuff, and the pandemic forced me to really collapse it and go, okay, this is the essential stuff. And I recorded it in short chunks, did all the things we were supposed to do about pre-recording lectures and chunking and everything. And then this is really good stuff. Like it's focused on the essential material. And so when I came back to the classroom, I had all this effort I'd put into really bringing the course down to the essentials. And then I had a lot more time in class to be doing things. I had admittedly been moving that way with engagements and in-class discussions for a long time. So it wasn't a huge change for me. It was more just making use of what I had developed. STV 210, though, is a different sort of course. It's essentially the history of computing for non-history students. And the reason I flipped this one was because what I'm trying to do is get students to work with the facts and the events and the places and the figures from history, but I don't really want to spend 3 hours a week lecturing about that. That's just stuff they can read and absorb and do in other ways. And if we do more interesting and exciting group exercises in class, the learning is much better. And they're learning what I want them to learn, which is critical thinking. The facts and figures of the history of computing, you can look that up on Wikipedia. So flipping it and finding a good survey textbook was key, and then having lots of engaging exercises in class and lots of show and tell was a big part of this as well. Just bringing in old computer hardware to play with. And then so next is Heidi.
Hi, I got this list as it's filled above me in order, and I had a hard time finding something novel to say for reason for flipping. My two courses, well, I have 3 courses that are flipped post-pandemic. These two are the most similar to each other. They're large by most standards. Very similar to Diana, I wanted to keep, well, the way I put it is keep the baby and the bathwater. So keep some of the good things, the good resources that I developed during COVID, but use that contact time differently. So they acquire the facts, the principles, the vocabulary on their own, and then we apply. So I did cut the contact time in half. It was an hour and a half once a week instead of twice. Those are split into sections, by the way. So Biology 130 was 4 intimate sections. I think most of it I'll wait for the future rounds to explain. So on to Brandon.
Okay, sounds good. Hey folks, my name is Brandon. I've been on campus for 20 years now because I did all 3 of my degrees here. And I run the RoboHub. So if you've walked through E7 atrium, E5 atrium, and seen the big glass cube full of robots, the robot terrarium, that's my space, my jam over there. I've also been taking or TAing ECE 46 for 15 years. And teaching as the kind of instructor of note for the last 8 or 9 of those. And the pandemic really threw me for a bit of a loop, because I'd been trying to get rid of exams in the course, to kind of change it up, to make it more project-based, because robotics is not about sitting down with a piece of paper and writing down equations and things. You have a computer and you have programming and you have a physical robot and all these things, right? So I kind of took advantage of COVID to move as much as possible over to project-based coding, understanding exercises, things like that. And post-COVID, kind of tried to keep as much of that as possible and then assign all of our contact time during the week to doing problems, experiments, applications, examples, questions, etc. So I made heavy use of online platforms during COVID, and then picked the 2 or 3 that really kind of seemed to get value add, and kept using those for this course and other courses, whether I'm doing flipped or not. So I've had a lot of good experience with that, and good feedback from the students on how that works, and kind of structure and things. I am a little bit I have benefited a bit from the fact that generally I teach 4th-year courses and grad courses, though, so I'm not thrown into the 1,300 students in a 1st-year course that Heidi is, and things like that. So I've generally got dedicated, interested, opting in students in my courses. So there's a bit of a different attitude there. I'll hand it back to Diana to keep us going.
Amazing. Thanks so much, everybody. It's just so great that we have such a wide range of course sizes and levels and disciplines. Hopefully this is helpful for the audience. So for our first question, a couple of people mentioned a little bit about this, but I'd love to hear a bit more. How did you get buy-in from the students, and possibly from your colleagues or faculty members, for using the flipped format? We'll just go with raising your analog hand if you'd like to say something. It'll be more of a conversation. And I'll be taking some notes about what people say in, again, an somewhat analog format. Anyone like to go first? I could start it off. Maybe I'll start it off this one. I promise I won't start the other questions. What I did was, before the course began, I surveyed the students. I sent out a sort of Microsoft Forms link to get information about their pronouns and learning preferences and all that kind of stuff. But I also included 2 questions, one of which was, what was your favorite part of online learning? And the other was, what was your favorite part, or what do you miss if it was the first term back, about in-person learning? And then people had all sorts of responses. And then on the first day of class, I summarized the responses for all of them, both questions, and read out the students' own words back to them and said, guess what? With the way that we've designed this course, you get the best of both worlds. You get the interaction with classmates and immediate feedback and ability to connect with your peers, as well as the flexibility and the ability to watch things multiple times, or slow things down, or speed things up, or not have to watch it at a specific time. So they, using their own words to reflect it back to them, I found that was helpful. Any other ideas?
Can I follow that?
Please.
Wow, I like that idea, because I'm not sure I got buy-in. Usually the Learn is open several days before the first class, especially with only one a week. And I laid out the expectations of what was going to be online, what was going to be in person, the expectations of the in-person, all of that. And then at the first in-person, I forget the guy's name, but he came up with these 3 questions, thinking of what you want to get out of university. Is it acquiring facts? Is it applying? Is it lifelong learning skills? And then which of those things could be done better on your own versus in person? I like your idea better, because I put a survey in for the one course that just finished, the 760. Now only about 10% answered. It was during final exams. And I made the mistake of reading the results just before I went to bed last night. And I just thought, oh my God, you can't please everybody, because I gave this arrow diagram with completely in person, the before times, description, completely online, the lockdown times, and the blended that they've had now, that my 4th offering of it. And I was picking their brains on, is it just right? Do they want it to the left? Do they want it to the right? 44% wanted fully to the in-person side. The next biggest group thought it was perfect. And then another group wanted it fully online. And then I allowed them to expand on their comments. And I mean, I've had independent emails saying, love the course design. But one of them was like, I paid thousands of dollars to be here, and I don't want to have to teach myself. So then I tried to go to sleep. So I'll pass that on to whoever wants to follow that.
All right. I can't actually find a way to raise my hand.
Oh no, I just meant literally like put it in
Oh,
the air.
literally. I
Yeah.
was like, I know there should be a way to raise my
No,
hand
just like
in
this.
here.
Go ahead.
But I I like the way you do things, Diana. I think I may have been a little bit more manipulative in the way I got student buy-in. But I just left everything scheduled as normal. And I used my tutorials and I told the students that they could have this free time that was my lectures to do their content. And I didn't quite plan it as well for my first year course, but for my fourth year course, I actually asked for it to be scheduled 8:30 on Monday morning. So when I told the students that they could use that time to do the content online from home, they were really happy about that. And when I halfway through the semester offered to go back to the classroom and do those 8:30 classes, they didn't want to.
Love
So
that.
it was more of a trade. I'm like, I will give you this. I'm happy to go to the classroom, but if you want to sleep in, you have to do your part. And that's how I got there, which maybe it makes me feel a little bit bad to say it out loud, but
I love it. Absolutely no shade. Scott or Brandon, not everybody has to say something for every question if you don't have anything to add, but if you do, please, we're welcome to jump in.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the big things for me was when we came back, I basically had two formats for the course. There was like the pre-COVID version, and then the kind of blended using the tools that we'd built, I built during COVID for the course, and looked at the two different models. And basically I had approval from the department to do one of those two models, but not really anything in between. So we didn't really have like a spectrum that we could pick from. It was basically in that first day of class. And because I have a relatively small class for something like this, right, I only had 30, 40 students. I could just ask them to be like, okay, these are the two formats that we can go with. This is the two marking schemes. You know, I've got an outline for both. I have whatever. I have the one that has midterms and exams and labs and assignments, or I have the one that's blended where it's project based and you get to actually write code and play with robots. Which one do you want? Which slightly biases their responses, but really that like technically that was the two options that I had, right? And then part of that was like, whatever you guys choose, that's what we're doing. So make sure you're good with it. And like, I proposed everything in that first class and did an introduction, very kind of more traditional lecture of an introduction of the whole course and the topic and the content and all the things. And then I used one of my several platforms, it was probably Piazza, to run a poll for the whole class. And was like, okay, we need 80% of you to respond, and you all have to, basically, you can continue revoting as necessary. And there was a discussion attached to it. And I basically forced them to like discuss until 80% plus of them had agreed on one side or the other. Yeah, that seemed to really help, because then it was like, okay, well, I have your votes from the beginning of the term. You said you wanted this, so this is what we're doing, right? So that seemed to really help with the buy-in piece, and also telling them about some of the back end piece. And this, I mean, this works for fourth year students. I don't know how well it will work for others, but being like, you know, there is research that shows your grades will improve if you do this piece, and peer instruction helps, and flipped helps, and having more contact time where we can work through problems helps, and and your grades will improve for all of these things. Like, it is, you know, statistically relevant. There's papers out there. I can find the research and send it to you if you want. Doing these things will improve your understanding and retention and your grade. And most of them are like, yes, that choice there, that one.
Sounds great. All right, I think I want to move on to the next question. Scott, you can go first for that one. I just want to make sure we have time for all of them. And that is, how did you ensure student engagement? Not just buy-in, but like, how do you know they're actually watching the videos and actually keeping up with the content in your class? Scott, you're welcome to go first. Sorry for putting you on the spot.
That's okay. So when I was thinking about engagement, I mean, a lot of it is the grades that Brandon just sort of pointed to. That's a huge motivator. It's a big carrot or a big stick, depending on how you want to look at it, for good or for ill. But when I was thinking about how do I ensure engagement, I think it's because I engage with them. When I have those, these are all night classes. So when I'm spending the 3 hours, I'm on for the full 3 hours circulating with the students and talking with them and going to each group and going to individuals, doing one-on-one. And then we take total class time to take up all of the things that they've come up with. And then we dive back in. And so a big part of knowing if they've engaged is I have to be there to engage with them. I know that they speed run the videos and they speed run the quizzes before class, and they admit this, and they admit when this doesn't work well. Because the other thing I do for engagement is self-assessments at staggered times throughout the term. So and I mark those. Those are not for the TAs, and they're marked anonymously to encourage a lot of honesty. And I can see where they're admitting where they're cheating or whether they're finding alternate ways of getting things done, and why that doesn't work, and why they eventually come back around to, okay, this is what the teacher has in mind. And of course I tell them, I've taught this a long time and this works better. I know for a fact that people understand the concepts better than the old way of doing it. So between all of those things, I find that I have a good sense of their engagement.
Fantastic. Anyone else? You mentioned you have quizzes before the class. Does anyone else do something like that, a quiz before class? Or, oh yeah, Heidi, go ahead, please. You're muted.
That's for the dog barking.
Oh,
So I've got online quizzes to promote having viewed the screencasts first, because my in-person time is supposed to be highlights of and working, but that's dubious. So getting them to view the screencasts ahead really separates the engaged students that are going to do well and the ones that are not. For the in-class bait to get them to come, I used it in the before times I did clicker questions. Now I have a pre-quiz, which is only 2 questions. I've gone through different systems, but I'm using Learn now. It's not synchronous, so it's open from 10 minutes before the class till 15 minutes into it, and it is password protected, and the password is on the screen for the first few slides and while they're walking in. So there's the pre-quiz, and built into my highlights is taking up that pre-quiz, and those can be edgy questions that are conversation starters because it's taken up, in the safe place of the class. And then in my hour-and-a-half slot, I have it's not usually in the middle of the slot, but I have a halftime break, and there is a 2-question halftime quiz. Or on three of the weeks, there's a paper-based worksheet. So my attendance is really high. Although some of the people that answered my survey said, oh, classes are useless. We only came because of those points. They were annoying. So, a few people said that. Next.
Someone asked, just because we were right on it, are those graded, those quizzes?
Yeah, so there's a 5, very formative. So 5% over the whole term, emphasis on participation. So 1 point for responding, an extra half point for correct. Otherwise, they just go click, click, and then they, resume their online poker or whatever. And Learn will not do that. So that's manual messing about. And then there's a 75% threshold across the whole term. If you get 75% or more, you get the full 5 out of 5. These kids are all going to be doctors, so they are extremely grade motivated. So even though they're worth fractions of a percent, this is enough to get them to come to class. And also, I do not entertain VIFs or anything. It's covered in the threshold on that. And I did not get into trouble on that yet.
Anyone else? Brandon?
I think there's also a question, Heidi, that maybe you can.
Oh, let's leave those for the end. We want to make
Sure.
sure. That was just so relevant.
But yeah, no, I think there's 2 pieces to this for my stuff. I do so my asynchronous is done with a peer assessment platform on Perusall for the content itself. So like the material, the text material, the videos, whatever it is in a like peer annotation platform, peer assessment platform, something like that on each kind of given term, which means that they are partially keeping each other accountable because they're asking questions and I give them a minute to actually answer each other's questions, because part of their again, part of it comes back to the mark. There's minuscule marks, 0.5% kind of thing, for like how well you respond to and help out your peers, right? So it's answering questions that they post on Piazza, it's responding to comments on Perusall, it's things like that. But the other piece is in class, I do two things. One is I say all of our discussion classes or problem solving or any of those are entirely optional. I post all the slides if I use slides, which is usually only for the first couple of classes. And then the other thing that I did initially by accident, because I went from 3 TAs to 1 TA, was I shifted the quizzes to be in class. So our kind of what were formative quizzes became summative in-class quizzes, but they're very short and we actually solve them in class. So actually we do the quiz and then everybody hands in their things and I shuffle them and then hand them back out to everybody. And then they mark each other's quizzes. So they can not only know, as we're working through the solutions, they know what their answer was, they know what the answer is on the paper. And then they also have to see about, justifying your answers and marking and, all of the other stuff that's attached to it, right? Which gets them really engaged with. And I've had, for the first time in a long time, when I started doing that, I had students coming up to me and being like, I know I could have done better, I'll study next time, like in class on the quiz. And it's like, it's not, and I have a similar thing to Heidi where it's like, only 60% of the quizzes are actually like your 6 out of 10 top quizzes actually count for marks. And so like you can miss half of the weeks and you're still potentially getting 100% on the quizzes, right? But the ability to do it in class seems to be the big thing, where they're looking at each other's solutions and we all take it up together and talk about why is that the answer? How do we get there? Is there another way to get there? What if they have this thing? Is that mostly correct? If it's mostly correct, does that mean it's good enough? Like those kinds of conversations can happen in class, right? Which is really effective.
Awesome. I also do pre-class knowledge check questions, which are ungraded. Just like here's a bunch of questions that you should be able to figure out based on the videos. And then first thing in class will be a Kahoot quiz on, again, the video material that's also ungraded. It's just for bragging rights. And that usually works pretty well, actually. Bragging rights are a potent motivator because it also feels bad to be sitting there getting every question wrong. And then the bulk of the class time is those sort of like group activities. And so as I'm walking around, if I see people who are struggling with a question, I say like, hey, have you looked at the video material? Here we go. You can sort of like draw people's attention back to the video material. Another sneaky thing I do is on the assignments, I'll include a link to a specific timestamp in a specific video if they need a hint for something. So just always pointing people back to that material and be like, everything you need is there. But yeah, the Kahoot quizzes have been really fun. And the in class is a group activity. It's more formative than summative, but just it's difficult. It's difficult, but it's harder to do the in-class activity if you haven't watched the videos, and people quickly learn that. Sarah, did you have any other things to add?
Yeah, I just quickly, I guess I take a little bit of advantage of the cohort system in engineering. The students are kind of going from class to class with their friends. So they show up to class just because everybody's going together. But I did at one point ask my 4th year class, like, why do you show up? Why are you watching the videos? Like, what is motivating you to do this? And the 2 biggest answers I got from them were, one, because we're with our friends, we want to hang out with our friends. And they're in 4th year, so they have a lot more electives, and mine is not an elective. So it was one of the few classes that they were together in a classroom, like, like they're first and second years. And then their other popular response was, if we don't do it, we know we're screwed. So there was no, like, they just couldn't do the tutorial problems. They couldn't do their assignments if they didn't do this stuff. And I was like, you know what, you're kind of peer and self-policing. But I will say it was a bigger problem with my first year course. And I think the problem there was that the content that was online felt too easy for them. And they went through it too quickly. They didn't really engage with it as much. And then when we got in class, they couldn't do the stuff associated with it. So I think it had a little bit the opposite effect there, was that they didn't see that challenge where they did in the fourth year course. So.
Really interesting. Lots of great ideas, everyone. So we talked a tiny bit about this already, but I just want to get people's thoughts. How did you make this work logistically? So in terms of like scheduling, some people split up their classrooms, some people had reduced contact hours. Let's just gather our thoughts here. There's a few different ways to do it. Sorry, since I'm already talking, I guess I'll just start with mine, but I won't start every other question either. But I did reduced contact hours. So I just did essentially on Quest, it's called a BLND course. That's the course code with, it says lectures are online and one 80-minute or hour-and-a-half tutorial in terms of contact hours. Anyone else like to describe their logistic setup?
So I can go quickly because
Great, yeah.
I maybe faked it. I left everything as normal, scheduled as normal. I put lectures, recorded lectures, or Mobius content. I had Mobius content where some of it was like videos and some of it was written and some of it was concept questions. But I said earlier, I gave the students back their lectures and I said, this is my trade. You can have that lecture time for yourself and do the content when you want to do it. And I even offered because I had a classroom booked and I said, I'm happy to, like, for you guys to use the classroom if you want to hang out together and do it. I'll show you how to set it up on the big screen, set up the content and go through it together. But I just left it, and it also helped a little bit because I was more easily able to say, if you don't like it, we'll go back to the classroom. Because I always had that time and room schedule that was available. You want to do a review session, we can do it here. So I didn't change anything. I changed my approach a little bit. And I used mostly tutorial time because I had bigger blocks and tutorials in order to do problem solving together.
Great. Heidi, yeah.
Unmuted, good, yeah. This fits under challenges more than logistics. Well, logistical challenges. One of my big issues is, I mean, I can't fake the schedule and leave a 400-seater unused. That I would be extremely unpopular with the registrar. I probably already am, well, for lots of reasons, but I'll want mine, the class that I'm just finishing has both sections on the Tuesday, and I'm using M3 1006, which means that room sits empty on the Thursday. And every winter term, I'm like, we got away with it again. We got away with it again. So I would love to partner with someone else that doesn't have to have quite so large a course, because I feel their pain, right? It's terrible use of incredibly limited space to have it sitting empty on the opposite one, or to have this, occasional use of it. So I'll let others speak, but that space, that if I'm the only one in my size category that flips, I have no one to partner with when I reduce my in-person time.
That's a great pitch. If anyone listening has a big class and would love to teach in this format, get in touch with Heidi after, and you can go, one of you on Tuesdays, one of you on Thursdays, or something like that. That would be
Sharesies.
awesome. Scott or Brandon, did anyone split up their students and do like half of them on Tuesdays, half of them on Thursdays? Awesome. I'm going to add that to the list as well.
Well, I split my class of 675 into 2 sections when I flipped.
I think the big thing for me logistically was just laying out the term on a schedule, where like the in-class, in-person, on-paper quizzes was every Thursday first thing in class. So if you were only able to like schedule a certain thing or an interview or whatever it was, you know there's like a 30-minute window that you really need to make sure you're there. And otherwise, yeah, someone else could mark it or I could mark it, and you don't really have to come to the problem stuff. You're going to probably do worse on the quiz and do worse on the labs and the project and all the things if you aren't there to ask those questions. But really the only kind of pseudo mandatory, and only if you care about your grades, pseudo mandatory piece of actual scheduled time is actually writing that 20 to 30-minute quiz once a week. And it's always the same class. It's always at the beginning of class, etc. So otherwise, pretty much everything was asynchronous or due. I think the due dates and due times was also a big one, right? Like every lab deliverable was due on a Thursday at 9 p.m. and every project deliverable was a Monday at 9 p.m. or whatever it was, right? And I try to avoid the midnight thing because then people work and work and work, and then it's like 1 a.m. They're like, oh my God, I didn't get whatever. If it's 9 p.m., then they can send me an email and be like, yeah, whatever, it's 9:02. Sure, I'll put it through, whatever. Right? It's a little more reasonable to be like, and then part of that is also a product of COVID, because 9 p.m. is a good due date across the world generally, because you can do like it's 9 a.m. In APAC, and like it's a reasonable timing for things. So
Scott, anything to add?
I want to echo the idea of predictability and making the course as tightly organized as possible, because this is different for a lot of students, and the easier you can make it for them to get into the rhythm of doing things before showing up, doing the quiz, making that as regular and routine and as predictable as possible, I think is a big part of getting the buy-in
For sure.
for the course. But logistically, STV courses, because we're interdisciplinary, we're open to all students on campus. We always just teach at night in 3 hours. So the logistics is, how do you make good use of 3 hours without really turning the whole class into a bunch of zombies? And so that comes back to just being engaged and making it worthwhile to be there for those hours.
So did you use the full 3 hours every week?
Close. I'll admit we end nights a little early sometimes. But there's lots of breaks, there's lots of discussion, there's lots of opportunities for students to get up and walk around and stretch their legs. So it's a long day for everybody. So I'm fully aware of that.
For sure.
And
yeah, if you're gonna have a night class, it's gotta be one like I'd rather have one like yours where you get to actually get up and do stuff. Great.
You have to be kind.
Yeah. I think this is our last question other than tools. So I know that we are not all rose-colored glasses here. There are definitely some realistic challenges that we had with the courses. So would anyone like to start with some challenges that you faced in teaching in the flipped format? Sure, yeah, Heidi, please.
Yeah, I think I've already hit them. There's the space issue, but having just looked at that survey last night or in the wee hours of the morning, getting them to realize that this really is working the best for them. So viewing of the screencasts, so many of the students, because you can see first access on Learn, and I've set them up as content items in this complicated way that allows me to track, and you see them first access the night before the final, and it's just not going to work that way. I've got a talk tomorrow where I'll touch on this, but it would be nice if Learn had we could set up an engagement index where we had certain content items designated required we can call them required, but it doesn't actually do anything. So it's got the window dressings of this should be possible, but have an engagement index and have outreach to those students that are not engaging. I mean, some of them are so disconnected, it doesn't matter. They won't respond to anything, but to get them to realize that that part is important. And I mean, some of them aren't coming to class or anything, but yeah, the engagement piece is huge, and then the physical space one.
Other challenges that folks had? I think, Scott, you mentioned that like it's a new thing. And so people are naturally gonna be not necessarily resistant, but maybe skeptical. Did you want to expand on that? Sorry for putting words in your
Yeah,
mouth.
no. I think that's a big part of it is jumping in right away. And like a lot of the students that take STV courses, this is one of the first times when they've had that in-class discussion component, where, oh, you actually care what I think is something I hear a lot. And so giving them that opportunity early, and convincing them that, yeah, I'm serious. I do want to know what's going on, and I want you to share everything. And I do that within 5 minutes. Like we're talking right away in large groups, and I'm modeling that from the very beginning. But with the predictability of knowing that, I think you have to be a little flexible and give them time to get up to speed. The first few weeks, they're going to forget about the quizzes. They're going to forget about doing the readings. The quiz marks on the first few weeks are going to be lower than what they really want. And so having what I think Brandon and maybe Heidi mentioned this earlier, dropping a few of the grades is an important part of just getting them, okay, this is going to work, but I need time to get on up to speed here.
Sarah, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I want to touch a little bit on what I consider to be my failed attempt. I won't flip a first year class again. For the reason I mentioned it a little bit before, is that the students just viewed the content as a little bit too easy, a little bit too straightforward, and I don't think they took it seriously. It was easier to push off that content when they had other stuff going on, and just be like, I'll just show up to the problem solving sessions and I'll be able to figure it out. And I found that it just snowballed. They got further and further behind, and they couldn't wing it. And what I found, so I guess I need to figure out a better way to get their buy-in on that in order to continue. I didn't have that issue at all in fourth year. Fourth year, they knew, or they messed up early and didn't do it and realized when they got to class, they were screwed, and fixed the problems quickly, maybe a little bit more experience in messing up, maybe by fourth year. But I found it really, really hard. The first year students needed me more. And I even found that when I worked with them in class, and I would say, like, I'm just going to stand here and be awkward until somebody answers my question. And then eventually they would start talking. But I think not. I had one student in first year tell me, you know what, we don't have you looking at us when we're doing it online. We don't have you standing there and being like awkward and just waiting. We don't feel that connection. And then I will say the other side of it is, with my fourth years, I had taught them every year throughout their studies. So I think that they felt that connection. They knew that I was doing this to help them, and that I wasn't hiding, because that's the other thing that I heard from first years, was that they didn't know me. They didn't even know if I cared. But my fourth years, I already made that connection with them, and it was a lot easier to get them. So I need to figure out a new hook to continue in first year. But I think just being with them and holding their hand maybe a little bit. I don't think they were ready for the flipped classroom and that independence.
For sure. Yeah, I was spoiled. I had third-year students who had had a few classes together, so some of them knew each other, so there was a little bit of a social aspect to it. Although one of the times that I flipped, it was very soon after coming back from the pandemic, and everyone who maybe knew each other at one point had forgotten who everybody was. And so putting them in groups and making them talk to each other, lots of people afterwards said that they were appreciated. It was like built-in friends. Like you just had someone, and two of the students that I put in a group together ended up dating. And I expect a wedding invitation if that yeah, they didn't know each other before my class, but now they're together all the time. Maybe I should cut that out of the recording. I don't know. No, I didn't give away any personal details. Any other thoughts? Yeah, please, Heidi.
Yeah, so I've got my two courses. One is a 1A for sure. The one that just finished with that survey I just looked at, 2B is the earliest they could be. I'm not finding them hugely improved in 2B. And I mean, this is not a tiny little cohort that we all grow up together. This is still a pretty massive group. And I'll touch on this tomorrow, but I found that the fall 22 and fall 23 intakes are kind of broken. They had a lot of disrupted years, whereas the ones like fall 20, we came from lockdown and it was a totally lockdown term. They'd still had an almost normal high school. Not that high school is necessarily fantastic prep, but this is the flipping is confounded with what I think is compromised backgrounds and high school experiences. So a lot of people will be running from flipping. I might be one of them, possibly under false pretenses.
That's so interesting, Heidi. I'd never thought of it that way, but it's so true. A student who had a really disrupted high school experience might associate online asynchronous content with a terrible time in their experience.
Well,
and
well, not
or
just
like
that.
a less, a less high quality educational experience.
Well,
and
not just
yeah.
Even the in-person part and in-person tests. They went for years, couple years of high school with no timed tests. So they were kind of screwed on both sides, right? They couldn't handle in-person testing because they hadn't been tested, and they could have had an aversion to self-learning. So it was kind of a lose-lose.
Yeah,
I mean, the
double
top
whammy.
quarter of the class is as fantastic as it's always been, but we have this huge bottom end that is just not coping.
For sure. All right. Well, thanks, everybody. I wanted to just quickly, in the next 1 minute, so that we can have 10 minutes for questions, some of the tools we used, some have been mentioned already. So we got Perusall, we've got Kahoot, we've got Brightspace. Lots of people did stuff just through Learn. Bongo I used for the video assignments in my course. That wasn't an aspect of flipping at all. It was just a tool that I used for one of the assessments. That's iClicker Cloud. Heidi mentioned that's used. This is a Vivox polling. So some people have used that, and the university now actually has, as of today, literally May 1st, a year-long trial license. So if you're interested, contact Pamphlettert. A really great tool. Brandon gives it a thumbs up. Of course, Piazza, a few people mentioned that. Critic, Brandon mentioned that as well. That's a great one. Oh no, you can get that money back. Madeline, you can probably get your money back. Critic is great for peer assessment. That's MATLAB, so MATLAB Grader. This feels like one of those quizzes, like how many of these brand names can you recognize? And then, of course, the best educational technology tool of all, pencil and paper. Oh yeah, that's how I did my stuff mostly. Nothing wrong with a good old pencil and paper. Of course, it doesn't scale when you've got 1,300 students, so absolutely no shade if you do use technology tools.
Oh, I did 3 paper workshops.
Ooh, good job.
Worksheets.
Amazing. So yeah, that's definitely so lots of tools out there. Did I forget any? Did anyone use anything that I didn't mention? This was a fun slide to put together. I don't recognize these logos. Yes, I will add the names and I'll post the slides afterwards. Thank you. I was saying them as I was revealing them, but I understand that not everybody has the ability to follow that. All right, so I would love to now open it up to questions from the audience. There has been a wonderful discussion in the chat already so far. So I'm just going to go through and see if there's any outstanding questions. We talked about, oh, thanks, Monica, taking their feedback and making the students part of the decision making. I think maybe that was Brandon, like making it sort of like a democratic. And yeah, Scott's point of your own engagement with them is going to reflect in theirs. Question and answer sessions using Learn followed by a discussion. Password protected quizzes. Oh, there was a question. People might share the password with classmates.
Yeah.
Possible that happens. Question for me. Do I download the Kahoot results for grades or just in class learning? No, I don't even bother. People don't always use their real names. Like people can use nicknames for that. So there would be no point to trying to look at it. Occasionally I might just look at it and be like, oh, it looks like most people got this question right or wrong. But with Kahoot, it does reveal the answer right away, as well as the distribution of how people answered. So you can fairly quickly get the feedback of like, ooh, lots of people got this question wrong. Let me take it up here on the board. And so it's more of that immediate feedback. That was what my goal of using the Kahoot questions was. Question for Brandon about the students grading each other, and Brandon has answered that. Quizzes are anonymized and randomly distributed. Yes, that's with Markbox. I think there's another session at this conference about using Markbox. So check that out. It's really, really cool what they can do with it. If anyone remembers what session that is, I just remembered seeing it in the schedule. I can't remember if it's an online session or if it's an in-person session. Critic as well is great for that kind of thing. Right. Oh yeah, in terms of tracking engagement on Learn, people do share, like someone can watch a video and it might not be recorded by Learn's, like they could watch it with a friend or something like that.
Mhm.
Great question about buy-in of international students. Lots of great answers there. So I guess Brandon and Scott, you've done such a good job answering the questions in the chat. There's nothing for me to write down here. Great. Yeah. Okay. At the end, let's see. Can a flipped classroom also be used to gain efficiency and cover more content or in more detail?
I'd be careful of that.
That sounds dangerous. You don't want to be adding more material. There is a danger of that, like of teaching a course and a half, because if you have all this online material and then you still have your 3 contact hours to like overload students and give them more than a course worth of work to do, and you want to avoid that for sure. Sarah, did you want to stand on that?
Yeah, so there's the difference between going like in more detail and more description for something like problem solving, more practice, but the same actual topics. Like, so to be able to get a better understanding of those same topics, which I think is super, super easy in a flipped classroom, but doing more topics is where things get out of hand because you can't go as deep and you can't get as good learning. So to me, I used it a lot for practice and for the why. Why are we doing this? Which sometimes you run out of time for in a regular lecture style is like, why is this important? What is this going to do for me in the future? A lot more of those conversations where they get a better understanding of the same content.
But can I follow that up, Sarah? That's exactly what I was going for with I called it Tuesday tips. And both sections went on Tuesday this past term, so the deadlines for all their stuff would be synchronized. And there was never a new slide. It was always, these are traditionally challenging things, or, build the pre-quiz thing to bring up this topic, or applications. I felt like I, for the first time, had something to offer strong students as well, instead of, we're always worried about the bottom end. But in reading the survey comments last night, I should never survey them, that's the problem. Some of them were like, oh, the classes were repetitive. Some, the same slides, yeah, you were promised to not have new content. And others said, oh, the classes moved too fast if I hadn't viewed the screencast. Yeah, because you were supposed to view the screencast. So I thought, how do I meet both aspects of this.
Great one. Another question, does anyone have students with multiple flipped classes per term, and do they think it's too much? It hasn't happened to me. I try really hard to make sure that my course is no more work than a regular course. And so if everyone does that, then it shouldn't be a problem, but that's a big if. And also what we think is the same amount of work and what a student thinks is the same amount of work is not necessarily aligned.
I think one thing to note, and this talks to the more content question and to the overload question, based on kind of feedback, and I always at the very beginning of every term and every course, I open up a start, stop, continue for the students that's anonymized. So if there's anything they want me to start doing, stop doing, continue doing, they have a forum where they can do that. That is completely anonymous, and I just get an email that's like, hey, you should start doing this thing. But the start, stop, continue is a great format to be like, be better. That's not a thing you can actually do, right? The students have to actually think a little bit about what they want you to do or stop doing or continue doing, whatever, right? But the big thing is that I also asked them all about how much time they spent on assignments, on labs, on projects, studying for the course, whatever. And with the flip, where they're doing knowledge intake out of class, they're going through textbook, they're watching videos, they're doing practice problems, whatever, and then doing the like, I don't understand this thing, come to class and ask questions about it, or figure it out on when we're doing the solutions for the quizzes, and like, why is that the answer, why is that how that works, whatever. And then in the labs, doing the work in the lab, they actually end up time-wise spending less time on the course because they're not spending 3 hours stuck on a problem, that in class they ask the question and we work through it together, right? Like there's none of the empty cycles of just, oh, I spent 7 hours on that assignment. Like that's not the goal. If you're stuck that much, you should be asking a question on Piazza or Perusal in my class, or asking the, basically poking the thing on Perusal to be like, please cover this question in class. I don't get it, right? Like one of the things I say right in that first week, if the class chooses the flipped version, is like, if you spend more than half hour on one of these problems, don't. And like, we will cover it in class, because you're not learning anything by just chugging away with no new information input. So the hours that you spend is actually far lower for a flipped class if the students are doing it like following and engaging and doing the knowledge outside and the application inside. It's actually less time overall and better understanding and better retention.
It's the if part of that that's my challenge.
Yes, that's which with a class of 30 or 40 is relatively easy. I can just stare at them awkwardly until they answer questions. But with more, it's more challenging.
All right. We've got 1 minute left. I'll maybe summarize some of the other things that people have said. We sort of been giving our final thoughts, but if anyone has any parting shots, please go for it. We have had a variety of positive and negative experiences with flipping. If you want to try it out, please do. There's lots of resources available to support your course design in this direction. And so beware of the pitfalls. So making sure that you have engagement, maybe estimate think carefully before using it with first year students. They may not be ready for this, but of course, if you want to try anything, go for it. And there's lots of people who are doing this kind of stuff. So there's a community of practice for flipped learning. So if you're interested in trying it out, definitely reach out to your CTE liaison or join the community of practice. If you're not at Waterloo, of course, I know there's lots of people attending the conference that are not from Waterloo. Hopefully your university also has supports for alternative formats of learning. And I would love to wrap things up now since it's 10:30. Thanks very much to amazing panelists. This was so much fun. Thanks to people for answering questions in the chat as well. I will make these slides available in some form somehow. I don't know how, whether the conference has a plan to sort of share things broadly after the fact. But that is it for the session. Thank you again so much for coming, and have a great rest of the conference.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for setting this up, Diana.
Yeah,
No problem.
Diana.
Thanks for participating. You made my job easy.
All right. Cheers.
Ooh, I'm gonna stop the recording now. I wonder if I can steal the chat content. Save chat. There we go. So now I can grab all of your wisdom, Brandon and Scott, from the chat comments and throw it into my slides. Cool. Thanks so much, guys. Have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Cheers, all.
Yeah, fine. Thanks again for organizing it, Diane.
You're welcome.